Yeah, so this will be my first live coding demo, so I'm totally gonna wreck it probably. So we'll talk about BigchainDB 1.0 today. We have just released the code for the server, the Python driver, and the JavaScript driver, as well as for the transaction command line tool. And I'm just gonna give you a quick rundown of where we're at, where we're headed. So basically, this is our product roadmap for BigchainDB. We have shipped this year 0.9 and 0.10, and then the 1.0. And I just want to give you basically with this presentation a bit of an idea, and then we'll dive into the demo. So a recap of the last 6 months. With BigchainDB 0.8, we had the goal to create basically a solid baseline for application builders to build on top of BigchainDB, and then we had previously RethinkDB support, and then added MongoDB support while maintaining RethinkDB support. And we also started with 0.9 to deploy BigchainDB for the IPDB testnet. And the overall goal of 0.9 was to make BigchainDB hackathon ready, because we were at a couple of hackathons during that time, and we encountered some UX issues, and so we took that feedback very literal and wrote it all down and tried to resolve all of that. And then with BigChain 0.10, out of that feedback, we took some and implemented it still. So we've added an event streaming API, we've added the HTTP API and polished it. We deployed the first IPDB test network, and we did actually a lot of work on BigchainDB's core. So thinking about BigchainDB's consensus and replication, framing it internally around certain guarantees that we would like to provide to the users to kind of create a baseline of communication amongst us, and then also to be able to share that with the users. So that involved a bunch of cleanups, and kind of the goal was to get ready for the 1.0 release that would be the next release. So now we're here, we have the 1.0, and we have the 1.0 in the sense of semantic versioning, because we care, or better to say our users care a lot about backwards compatibility, which is why we bumped the version number to 1.0, and the core commitment that we're giving to the users is that from now on all minor and patch versions will be backwards compatible, and we would only introduce breaking changes when introducing a major version. So BigchainDB 1.0, there will be a blog post on this live by tomorrow morning, I think. We have a couple of really cool things happening. So we have asset querying. Previously, the asset we added divisible assets in 0.8. That is an asset you can create it in a create transaction. You can define the divisibility of the asset, and then you can split it in consequent transactions. And so far the asset itself was baked into the transaction. What we have done now is, under the hood in MongoDB, we've created a new table. So there's now the BigChain table that stores the blocks, and in those blocks there are the transactions. And now we have a separate table for assets, and we link them with content addressing between each other to make sure that we address we give you the right result when you query BigchainDB. So that's now in there. It leverages MongoDB's text search. So when you query the asset endpoint, basically, you get all the assets for the text you have searched. We've added a second driver, so you can now use BigchainDB with Node.js and in the browser, and we have the bundles also ready for that. We've done a bunch of work on security and correctness guarantees, and there is now a full blog post on this, what we think is a valid transaction for BigchainDB, and the individual steps that we check the transaction if it's valid or not. Backwards compatibility, I talked about that already. We have the IPDB developer, the testnet and developer portal now in private beta, so maybe there's even someone that's using this already. I don't know. Okay.
We don't got access to that.
So we've sent out some invites. Some will follow later. And we've upgraded to the IntelLedger protocol's newest version of crypto conditions, now compliant with version 2 of crypto conditions. And kind of the goal that we aimed for with BigchainDB 1.0 was really to make the data inside of BigchainDB safe and to have this backwards compatibility commitment, which led us to update like a lot of our external interfaces, so the HTTP API and so on. Yeah, so this is the blog post that we have released about valid transaction, and we're planning to do more documentation in blog posts and kind of like combine that into our current Sphinx documentation to always have like an update, basically. Then this is the asset endpoint. So what you can see is that you can you query for all the assets in BigchainDB with a text string. And then what you can say, for example, you can query for BigchainDB. I don't know if that works, doesn't. And then you get all the assets returned. Then what you probably want to do is you query the transaction, see if the transaction is actually valid, it's signed, it's included in the block, and then you can be ensured that this is the correct result. And yeah, last but not least, we've released and implemented the JavaScript driver. And now we come to my live demo. So I have this JS fiddle prepared, and you see a bit of code here. And you also see that there is a little like application window. So how JS fiddle works, just to give you a bit of an overview, there is the HTML part. There is the JavaScript part, and then there is the CSS part. And basically all of these render into this output, which is a website. The code is, I guess, can everyone see that? Or So yeah, to start, we have included here, so the JavaScript driver is hosted under unpackage.json that allows us to host it from npm. So it's basically included here in the script tag, and then we have a bunch of HTML, and what we can see here is that there is this button, and when we click the button, actually there is a function called chirp triggered, but there is currently no content, so I guess we have to implement that. And there is a bunch of CSS, but I'll not go into detail because I'm sure you all like CSS. So first of all, yeah, what I want to show is that there is the connection being established here to the IPDB mainnet, and I think there is already, decrease this a bit. Okay. And then we kind of have this chirp protocol. I'll go into detail later on what that is. But first of all, we kind of wanna get the input from the user what the user's username is. So what we can do is we just use window.prompt and ask the user for the username. So we say, "Hi user, welcome to Chirpy, enter name." And we store this in a variable called username. And then second of all, we also want to have the user to actually sign their transactions. So we have to generate a private and public key pair. So what we can do is we call this user keys, and we use the BigchainDB key pair method. So what we can do is we use the BigchainDB JavaScript driver, and there is a method called, let me see here, ed25519. Yeah, ed25519 key pair. So now we have created that, and that generates a dict that has a public key and private key. And then now, once I type something in here, right, I want this to first of all show up here, but I also want it to be published to BigchainDB. So what I can do is I'll start to create a transaction, but first of all I need to get the value from here. So what I can do is I'll use a bit of browser magic. And I really tried to do that without jQuery because I can. So I know that this field is actually, I called the class content. So I'll just use content and I'll extract the value. And then I need to create a BigchainDB transaction. So I do this by calling BigchainDB .transaction. And then we have this method called create transaction because it's a create transaction. So we do make create transaction. And the first parameter of this function is actually the asset itself that we want to create. So what I'll do is I'll just put an empty asset for now, and we'll come back later to it. Then there is a metadata field that we can fill out or not fill out. So I'll just put null because there is no sense in using it right now. And then what I need to do is I need to give the transaction an input and an output. The input is implicit here because it's contrary to some other contrary to like a common blockchain. On BigchainDB, anyone can create any asset they want. They just need to give it a name, give it like an amount, and boom, you have it in a create transaction. So we'll create an output first and then an input. We can do it the other way around if we want as well. So I'll just do user keys, the public key, that's my input. And then I'll also create a output that is slightly more complicated because I need to use the public key that wants to receive this output. So what I'll do is I'll do BigchainDB dot transaction dot make output, and that takes another argument that is BigchainDB dot transaction. And by that point, you probably will be wondering if this will ever work. So we'll do make ed25549 condition. So what we call a condition is basically the condition that you need to fulfill in order to spend the transaction. That's exactly what I'm creating here currently. So make condition receives the user's public key. So we'll just be spending actually the asset to ourselves immediately. It doesn't make too much sense, but this is really a super simple demo that I can code here in 15 minutes. So now we have the transaction. So let's, for sanity, try to console log that and see what we get. Sorry? Oh, thank you very much. So we inspect this here. And then the console is super tiny, and we'll run it. And we're missing a... Does anyone spot where we're missing a... we're missing a closing bracket. No! It's exactly what I don't want it.
Curly bracket after the last.
Sorry?
There's a comma missing.
Yeah, comma.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, perfect. Wow. You win the first prize of live coding challenge. Thank you so much. Yes, so now the script works. I'm very happy. So you see now there is actually a prompt asking you to type in your name. So I'll type in Tim. Nothing happens still because we haven't implemented anything yet. So this transaction now it's being generated, but we need to still sign it with our private key. So what I'll do is I'll create another variable called sign transaction signed, and I'll again call the BigchainDB transaction tool, and there is a method actually that's called sign transaction. And this takes in the actual transaction, and it takes in the private key for the input that we have created the transaction with, which is the corresponding private key to the user's public key. So we'll do user keys dot private key. And then, obviously, we need to send that transaction to BigchainDB. So we have the connection from the top here that we can use. And what we can do is we can call post transaction and just give it the transaction signed. And then we want to have this message to show up in an optimistic update right here. So optimistic update means no matter if it goes through or not, we'll just put it there. And then we'll take care of any eventual errors that happen later. That's I don't know. We'll just do it this way. It's not ideal, but so what we can do, there is this magic method that I implemented, and I cried a little because apparently it's still not that easy to write only browser-based DOM manipulation codes. I still want to use jQuery. So we'll post this, and then what we'll do is actually we get the transaction back from post transaction. We'll take it. Also, I can make this bigger again. And then what we'll say is we'll call this method called setChirps that takes care of setting the chirps or tweets. Chirps on the user interface. That method takes a list. So we need to do transaction.asset.data. And we need to give it this like magic little false flag. So now one thing that we have forgot so far is that we haven't decided on our data structure that we want to post on BigchainDB yet. So what does a tweet, what makes a chirp, what makes a chirp a chirp? And so for my definition, a chirp makes a chirp if it is of type chirp, and we have this value actually prepared already. I'll just call it chirp 8 because I had a couple of rundowns before already. So chirp protocol. Then we need to have the username. So we'll call that name, and I need to check. It's called username. Then we have obviously the content that we have extracted, and it's in the content variable. So we'll call it content and edit. And then also we want to sort this timeline so that the latest tweets show up on the top right. So what we can do here, I just called that time, and with JavaScript, what you can do is you can call the getTime method, but I think it's not 100% the correct Unix timestamp or whatever. For this it works. So now we have the whole transaction. We're posting the transaction optimistically to the feed. Should we click run?
There's a dot, right?
Yeah.
Sorry?
After the
One dot is
post, there's a dot.
before that.
Oh, perfect. Wow. You guys should be my syntax checkers actually. So the script works. I can still enter my name in. So now we say hello world. We chirp, and the transaction has been sent. And you can see hello world here. Now one last thing, what I want to do is, now it's only usable for myself, so that's a bit boring. And I also need to demo the asset querying endpoint, so there is this HTTPS. So this is our IPDB endpoint, or our root endpoint of BigchainDB running on IPDB. And it has this new endpoint called assets. It's actually linking in the wrong way. So we already have found a bug here. So this is the endpoint. You need to actually give it a query parameter that's called search, I believe. And then what you can do is you can look for assets in BigchainDB. So I can put in chirp 8. And what I get is I get back this single transaction I just sent with that timestamp. So we can exploit this actually to render our our Twitter timeline. So what I can do is I can use the connection, and I use this new method called search assets, and I'll give it a search term, and the search term is simply chirp protocol. And then when it returns to me, what I want to do is I want to unpack this data such that I only have the chirp itself, so I can do assets, and then I'll just map. And if you have better ideas, then that's great, but I'll do it this way. So I'll just unpack it basically, this list of assets. And then what I still need to do is I need to sort it. So I sort by timestamp. This means, oops. Sorry? And now someone will probably slaughter me, but I'll just do date, b.date. That's a bit of annoying stuff, but sorry. So this is how I sort an array, but actually it's sorting in ascending order. So because we're lazy, what we can do is we can just call reverse here on the array itself. So we're making an ascending order, descending order, and then we'll call set chirps again. And now the script is running. I type in my name, and my tweet is still here. And if somebody was able to go to that page in a quick amount of time, and what you can do is actually you can type show afterwards, and maybe I need to update it, I don't know. So it's probably this. So if you go there, actually now you can live tweet, and there is no backend in between. It's just BigchainDB and a browser app, and you can say, what's going on? And tweet that, or you tweet your favorite, I don't know, like whatever ICO stuff. That's what the cool kids do on Twitter these days. Yeah, so that's it for the demo. One last thing. So yeah, what will we be doing beyond 1.0? We have a lot of stuff to do on the core. So consensus and replication itself is a big concern to us and to our users. So we'll do architectural changes on the core in the next 6 months. We'll try to get most of our attack vectors fixed. There is an issue on GitHub that you can check out, and we'll gradually go down and fix those. We'll have a crowdsourced and a professional security audit. And then ultimately, kind of the goal should be to make BigchainDB more secure, more decentralized, and more scalable, and to allow it to be run in security critical scenarios like the IPDB production public net, for example. So yeah. Questions?
Maybe that's more IPDB related, but is there any cost in sending a transaction, and if not, how do you spend?
So for the testnet, we have this kind of trick, and you might have seen it, and he also put out a camera. So there is this kind of firewall in front because there is no cost involved yet. For the production net, there will be a cost for every transaction, and that is our spam prevention mechanism, basically.
And how do you pay? Is that like a currency or?
We're thinking about it. So we want to allow credit cards, but we also want to allow cryptocurrency payments. We just today had like an idea of having kind of a literal IPDB API token that no stupid token sale or whatever. It's really just, it's literally a mechanism to use the API, and So that's one technical option. The other one is to run it to have like decentralized gateways around the nodes. There is probably more technical solutions even. I mean, if you have one, I'm happy to hear it. Yeah, you were first.
What if security audit will force some backwards compatibility breaking change? What you plan be?
Yeah, so of course, like BigchainDB 1.0, it's we're in a fast-moving market, right? So expect a 2.0 like in the span of the next half year to a year. So if the security audit breaks something, by the way, if any security issues arrive that have breaking changes, we'll probably have to swallow the bitter pill. Of course, security is like one of the main concerns we have. So yeah, we'll do everything to ensure that.
I think the nodes will validate the transaction, right?
Yeah.
What's the benefit for me running a node?
Well, depends heavily, right? If you are an IPDB caretaker, you might just want to run the node in order to bootstrap this global database that allows everyone to store their data, and you kind of the IPDB Foundation will take care of covering your costs basically. In an industry setting, for example, there might be vastly different incentives to run a node, right? Maybe you want to share data between departments, and it's really just a top-level command to do so, right? So there is no incentive. Yeah.
Is the ordering of the chirps guaranteed, like, anyway?
No, not at all. I mean, what I could have done, I mean, it's literally client set, so I could have put only 0, or I could have put like a super large timestamp and ended up either on top or on bottom. So there is, however, if I'm not mistaken, when a validator casts a vote on a block, there is a timestamp being set on that vote. And so what we could have done is there is more API endpoints where you can retrieve the votes of a block. So we could have retrieved the average time of all the votes casted. But technically it's feasible to kind of do the ordering based on BigchainDB's opinion of what comes first and what comes last. Yep.
What's your perhaps from the technical perspective away from that? What's your business plan in terms of marketing to the right crowd?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So maybe I'll just get down anyways, because chat anyways. So BigchainDB, right? We're open source, and it's essentially a dual licensing model from a business perspective, right? We're going to sell enterprise licenses, kind of like MongoDB, for people who want to run this in internal network. And then for the community, you can take it, use it, run it under AGPL, right? So that's kind of the way that we look at it from a dual licensing perspective. We also offer consulting, certification, training, all that kind of stuff, right? To get it out to the community, I mean, the number one thing that matters in an open source world is having community, having people building on it and seeing what they can do, what the power is, and that's something that we're going to do. We're going to have a much stronger push getting out to the community. So, for instance, prizes, hackathons. This meetup is one of those. We talked about doing a roadshow around the world, or like a global hackathon in real time kind of thing. So that's essentially who we want to get. We want to get developers building on this, and everything else comes from that.
Yeah.
Talk about support for more databases coming up, right? I don't know if it's a stupid question, but I've just been looking at graph databases recently. I wonder if there would ever be any. Have you thought about, I don't know, maybe how you'd integrate with some of these new trendy graph databases? Maybe.
Okay. Which one are you thinking specifically?
I've been looking at dgraph recently.
I don't know that one, but I know isn't there this Neo4j?
Yeah.
I think, but it's like not a database you would use. I think to store data. It's more like data science.
Yeah.
Sorry.
GraphDB.
Okay. So we have to answer this question in general. We have we initially started with RethinkDB and then switched over kind of like around that time when RethinkDB moved into the Apache Foundation. We switched to MongoDB, but without dropping support for RethinkDB. And what we did is, which I think is a really nice job from like everyone in the team, the developers, is we abstracted the database interface into a bunch of methods that what you basically do is kind of I think it's the Python ABC, the abstract base class. So basically you just inherit that, you have a bunch of methods to implement, and then you're good to go basically. So if you want to add a graph database to BigchainDB, I think we can totally make that happen. It's open source, you could look at that, but we don't have plans to do that in the near term.
Yeah.
We're happy with MongoDB actually, as it like the features like the asset search was really nice to implement, you know, with the text search they provide, and you can do lots of stuff. Like what I've just showed you is like really just looking up a single key, but you can also exclude keys. You can search for keywords. I think there might even be we don't have it implemented, but you could even have the English assets show up, for example. So we're actually quite happy with MongoDB. Any more questions?
Yeah, about assets. So are assets going to be like the whole thing for BigchainDB, or is it just like the first thing you guys implement?
It's in the longer terms of things. It's probably a very basic layer. I can see a lot of things we could do. Particularly, I think what we've been talking about a lot is asset policies. So kind of, and this goes into multiple ways. It's first of all defining roles and permissions around an asset, and who can spend that, who can even create assets, who can transfer those assets, and to which kind of identities that live on BigchainDB can those assets transferred with. And that would all be kind of in a smart contract fashion be implemented at the issuance of the asset. But then we even had ideas about like implementing, you know, a language inside the asset issuance that you can do very crazy things like whatever you want basically. I think we'll go with what is useful to our customers. So what I can see in the immediate future, what is useful is definitely kind of this roles and permissions scheme that you implement at the beginning. It's kind of like, think of it as a descriptive language on how to define roles, and then they get, every time something is transferred, gets kind of validated from the nodes. And then from there, I think then that's too far, you know, in the future.
Yes.
One thing actually that I want to mention though is we have plans for an asset-driven driver also. Imagine you could have a Django-like ORM where you don't see the transactions anymore. You just have create, read, and update. You don't have delete, obviously, but you have just those methods, and the transactions all get kind of like built under the hood and sent and whatnot. And the permissions being the underlying crypto conditions, the locking scripts of the transaction, basically. So these are, I think, from a UX perspective, from a interaction perspective, these could be the next steps, but I have no guarantee that they are. We really want to focus on security and core now. So, yeah.
Cool. With that, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity, I mean, just to ask general questions about BigchainDB. We hit a milestone. We've been on this journey now for almost 2 years, building BigchainDB, taking it from the idea from a scribe, where we realized that the scalability of the existing blockchain infrastructure architectures weren't going to allow for data-driven use cases. And now with 1.0 that we formally announced tomorrow, I mean, this is an exciting time. We're working with some strategic partners that we really value and trust, and we want to continue that with the community and everything like that. And so, you know, questions about our business model or questions about BigchainDB in general, just like to open the floor up and see if there's any questions about that. Yes?
Yeah, I noticed on some GitHub issues there was some crosstalk between like BigchainDB and the IPFS guys in terms of like some of the standards that they've, you know, like IPLD and things like this. Like, what's the extent of like that relationship? So far as like IPDB goes and like this spec standard ones and things.
I can answer that. I mean, Joan Bennett and Jeremy and all of those, they are friends, and we're iterating with them on a regular basis. And the idea, I think, behind the current partnership or iterations is to implement IPLD into IPLD. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
IPLD is kind of the a Merkle tree built into a JSON data structure, and so the plan is to introduce this data structure into BigchainDB, mainly to allow for the IPLD paths, and to allow for which I believe is the strongest point for any kind of ledger or blockchain, whatever system, to implement IPLD, which is interoperability with other systems. So I think just today we talked about this again, and about putting it on the roadmap again, putting more focus on this item on the roadmap.
Without require breaking change. So.
It always depends how you frame a breaking change. If it's just an option you can turn on, then it will not be a breaking change, right? So yeah, it can happen in the next 6 months. I don't know. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of applications that could run that across BigchainDB or Ethereum and IPFS and have it would play?
Yeah, definitely. So you will see it also in this blog post that will come out. Kind of how I framed it is, and this might not be the ideal framing, but because we still have years to go, but with I think Web3 from Ethereum for payments and business logic processing, with IPFS or Swarm, Ethereum Swarm for media blob storage, and with BigchainDB for storing the metadata in a global order. You have now the tools to implement all of those in the browser. Doesn't mean though that, I mean, if we're again trying to put this in perspective with decentralization and everything, we still have the domain name system and everything, but we're slowly getting, I think, to a point where we start to realize what different systems are good for, what are the best use cases they serve, and then and now we start to see kind of the platforms arise where these technologies could be used. So yeah, I think this could work today on this computer, I think. But if you want to take it a step further, much further, you will have to wait, I think, for everything.